Hello, 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 and welcome to the third episode of Cannesversations. I'm Eliana,
And I'm Patrick.
and today we're joined by Öykü.
Hello, everyone. I'm Öykü. I'm a Paris-based film critic. I write for several medias, and I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. How has the festival been treating you?
At, like in the first days, it was really stressful. Like the queues were really long, the ticketing system. But I think since the big titles have passed, I think we're entering the second week, and things will get calmer, and we'll finally start to enjoy ourselves. I guess, like I'm hoping at least. And it's sun is shining, the rain has
Yes.
stopped. Like this is really good.
Yeah, it's so good to have you here. And could you maybe tell us something about your affiliation to the Cannes Film Festival? Like how many times have you been here in the past? And
This is my fourth time, but third time as press, because the first time it was like a student accreditation, and it's completely different, the experience, like literally. And for now, like I can say, the previous ones, but always there was like a pandemic situation, and I feel like this is the most normal one and the most crowded. So I think I try to get used to that, like there being so many people around. And I think, like, yeah, this year was a bit tough than last year, I'd say.
right, and maybe this year, as you say, it's really back to normal. Whereas 2021 was really then packed with great titles of films, but not so many journalists as they would usually attend the festival. Last year was more normal, but maybe the lineup was a bit worse, I
Yeah,
suppose.
definitely. Like lineup was really bad. So this year so far, the films were like not. There are not any masterpieces apart maybe from Glazer, because last year I remember like Stars at Noon, Pacifiction, Crimes of the Future, like really good titles, but also very bad ones in the competition. But
Right.
this year there's some level that all the films that I saw till now was like up to that level, maybe except Firebrand. And today I saw Club Zero, which I hated it.
Oh yeah.
Apart from that, like it's okay.
Yeah, and when one is at a festival, one learns also to skip certain films if, the buzz is very bad. So I don't even bother going to Firebrand because I only heard terrible
Ah.
things. But anyway, we have a good lineup for today. We have 3 films. Which films are we going to talk about today, Eliana?
So, today we will talk about the new Nuri Bilge Ceylan
Yes.
film about dry grasses, as well as the new Joanna Arnow film, The Feeling That the Time for Something Has Passed. And finally, we will talk about the new Todd Haynes film, May December.
Right. And maybe just as a note to our listeners, to our audience, it's just we intended to upload more episodes so far. It was very busy, and as Öykü said earlier, if you have different accreditations, you have a different experience. So this is why a lot of the screenings Eliana and I see at different times of the festival, which leads to very different schedules. So we often didn't have the time, and then if you get home back at like 1 or 2, at night, it's difficult to imagine to still record a podcast. So that's why it has been a bit infrequent, our
Yes.
updates. But as you may have noted, we have a jingle now, so we're really happy about that. It might be preliminary, but for now it works perfectly fine, I hope, as a jingle. And yeah, let's get into the Nuri Bilge Ceylan. And of course, who could be a better guest on our show than Öykü? Öykü, can you tell us a bit about maybe your relationship to Ceylan as a filmmaker? Are you an admirer of his work?
I couldn't say, like, I respect him as a filmmaker. Like he's definitely one of the greatest filmmakers in Turkey, like in the contemporary cinema. Like you can compare to when you compare him to other directors, you can clearly see the difference in his in his work. That I'm definitely sure. But like when I think about his cinema, his aesthetics, and I ask myself, like, what if I were in Turkish, would I like him as much as I do today? The answer is a bit no. I think, but like since today the reality is that he's a Turkish and he's doing films about Turkey, yeah, I think it's like, yeah, I like him as a filmmaker. But for his previous feature that was like in competition at 2018, Wild Pear Tree, I think it was my least favorite film so far. Maybe Climates was a bit like in his early work I didn't enjoy it much, but I think like Wild Pear Tree was really bad. And upon watching about dry grasses, you see how his style can be really exquisite and masterful. And yeah, and the comparison is really, really like uh, evident between Wild Pear Tree and about dry grasses.
Yeah, I must say I have missed the Wild Pear Tree. I still have to see that, and I also didn't see the film that won him the Palme d'Or in 2014, Winter Sleep. I only saw Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, which I really, really liked.
Yeah,
And uh, Eliana, I think you have not yet seen Ceylan film,
Yes,
right?
this was my first Ceylan film, and
So what kind of experience was that?
I was honestly quite blown away in some sense. I know that this is, it left me, there are very few films that I think are able to resonate a chord somewhere deep inside of the viewer. And this film did it for me. In terms of identity, in terms of belonging, in terms of the complexity. So the film is, correct me if I'm wrong, about a man who teaches in an urban, not an urban, in a rural area in Turkey.
Right,
And
that is in Eastern Anatolia.
Eastern Anatolia, where the climate is quite harsh and difficult to like. It's always snowy and far from the city centers, so it's a bit depressing area, let's say.
Yeah, and we learned that there you basically only have two seasons. You have a hot summer,
Yeah.
or you have a very severe winter, a very
Yeah.
cold winter. And the reason why he's there is because it's basically an act of duty. Like it's
It's an obligation to
it's
like.
an obligation. He
like-
has to work there because it's an act of solidarity, I suppose, right?
No, it's like it's something public. Like the public system like forces you to work far from where you normally live.
Right.
It's like a yeah. It's
public
it's,
service.
Yeah, exactly. Public service. It's like this for not only for teachers and also doctors that also.
Right, and you get a sense of frustration, right, in that character that he does not want to be there.
Yes, it seems that he does not want to be there, and these were actually influenced by his screenwriters' diaries.
Yeah, exactly.
Akin Aksu.
Akin Aksu's his own experiences as a teacher. He's really a teacher. So his own experiences. Yeah.
So what happens in the film is this man is accused of having some form of indecent contact with the children there. And this becomes more a meditation in some sense that becomes a process on what is civilized contact with the future generation, what is correct, what is not correct. The protagonist is somewhat unlikable, and he challenges this idea of, oh, I was just being nice to the students. I was giving them gifts. I was showing them that we could be friendly. It later, and this is, I was curious to see how you thought of this scenario.
But before like getting into that, I think we must also say that that's not the only part of the narration. Like it's a character study. So when someone asks me like, what is this movie about? It's really hard to tell the story, like, because even though the part you tell was like a part of the story, it's not the whole thing. So it's really difficult to summarize what is going on in the movie. But I think that part clearly explains how ambiguous and complicated this person is towards because of the interactions with his pupils. Like he tries to be generous and like kind, but he has also a really dark and really condescending way of talking to these kids. So you don't know what is he thinking about that kid, like that girl either. So I think the it's not about a sexual thing. It's just like the way he approaches to the other people around him, and it's crystallized with the in his relationship with the girl. Because when you think about it, in his every interaction with the other people, there's like a complex, ambiguous side of it. Like we don't know if he like likes that person or like tries to like. He also always tells bad things about them too. So I more think I I think I place that in the more global character trait of that person. Like, yeah, I think it's just like a reflection of that side.
Yeah, and what Öykü says is, of course, true that this is maybe rather like the first third of the film or even less, and then it develops more and more into different things, and not even into one different things, but many. And I think it can really be said that this is sort of reminiscent of the structure of a novel. It feels very much like reading a novel. It is also structured alongside these
Micro narratives.
yeah micro narratives, and also long dialogues, right? You have these long dialogue scenes, the first one maybe being the discussion in the teachers lounge, and then you have these really these moments when you have a dialogue that goes on sometimes more than 10 minutes or so. There's this one in the second third where our protagonist Samed, or what is his name again?
Samet.
Yeah, Samed. He talks to an English teacher called Nuri, on whom this is also so ambiguous. This film is full of ambiguity. At the beginning, it doesn't seem that he is very much interested in her, but then his flatmate Kenan, he seems to be much more successful in in gaining her attraction, and then suddenly our protagonist becomes more interested in that English teacher as well. It's and then they have this fascinating conversation, and it just this is sort of the structure that it really reads like you can see it as a novel, but it's also so filmic. I think it's very cinematic. It has these shots where one of the themes of the film is really fleshed out when the camera assumes the sort of over shoulder look, and the interlocutor is blocked by the backside of the head of the person over whose shoulder the shot is framed, as if we cannot really see the other person because we are so concerned with our own lives, and that these other persons or these other people might well be just a projection of how we perceive the world, how we perceive them. And I think that's just, there were very fascinating shots in that film.
To go off of that, also there was this woman. She is a painter, and the main character Samet likes to take photos, as if there is a difference in how one documents a moment, whether it's translated into a painting in this more expressive sense, or if it's simply capturing what one sees in a more immediate sense. And I think for me, there was a lot of immaturity in the character of Samet. But one in a sense that he's also very sure of himself. When you talk about how he later becomes interested in this woman who he seemed to at first have no interest in, it really seems like an interrogation of his own self that he's searching for. And
Right.
I think he knows that he's like a really not self accomplished person, and he reflects to that to other people, to the relationship with other people, and his frustration with the students is actually, I think, comes from here, because there's a monologue near the end where he talks about, like, where he addresses in his mind to his student, what was her name, Sevim, like,
Yeah.
as if she was representing some kind of idea, some kind of ideal that he'll never attain, because he's already past that age, past that maybe not maybe he could never have that because of his personality. So I think there's a frustration about that, and maybe there's also the frustration that Sevim doesn't know about anything, that her potential, and she's so carefree and doesn't give a shit about anything, that there's also this part of her attitude actually, and her attitude is really complex too. Like we don't know what is she really thinking about Samet, about this weird relationship between them.
Yeah, and this relationship is also very reminiscent of, I had to think of Nabokov, and Lolita, in the way that you have this elderly woman, this elderly man that is sort of projecting all these conceptions, all these very difficult, even philosophical thoughts. He's all projecting that on this little girl, who is of course not an equal in an intellectual sense. So it cannot, there cannot be this relationship that he projects on her, but that also makes it so fascinating. And I also love this idea of projecting here, because I think the film has this scene that we're not going into, because it's really, one should see that by themselves, but there's this
Maybe we can like tell this as a spoiler, because it's a really like a scene that is important, right?
Yeah, but maybe we can sort of circumvent that in some way. I don't know, but because I don't know if people, when they listen to this podcast, listen to that podcast, I don't know if they should already know what the specific scene is. I don't know. Do you want to have a spoiler segment here, or
We can try to. Do you want to try to circumvent as much as you can, or do you think?
yeah, just the way the film starts already. That's I think a lot of the people to whom I talked, they didn't really notice that, but when the film starts, it starts with a snowy landscape and
white,
the snow is falling, and we hear the snow fall in a way that is not realistic, because we cannot really hear snow that falls on the ground and then it creates a little crush or something. But here there was this sound as if like there was hay, or as if there were rain or something, but it was just the soft snow, as if it was like hitting the camera or something. So it already sort of allured to a matter aspect of that film, and later the film explores that a bit more, and it sort of connects to the overall theme of how complex one person is and how complex one person tries to project themselves to the environment, to other people. And this film finds such a beautiful metaphor for that. And yeah, I don't know if we should go into that.
I think we can go like saying about
Okay.
how because there's in press conference Ceylan told uh, to the journalist that sometimes when he shots in soundstage, he forgets, like in studio, he forgets that it's a studio. It becomes like a real place. So sometimes he needs to remind himself that it's actually a studio. So I think there are, like you said, some parts that we get the sense that it's a constructed reality, not only by the filmmaker, but also by the people, like the characters inside, because we perceive through their experiences, in several levels. It's a constructed reality, and that scene you're going to circumvent right now is also the example of this. I think.
Right, and how maybe our interior world is maybe also how that can be linked to the cinema and theater.
As well as fantasy and dreams, and the energy that, maybe it's too much to say this, but the energy that becomes very relevant of leeching off of the impossible. And then it challenges us to think about what it is when this impossible scenario might be broken in some sense.
Right. And maybe we should go to another film here, because we have to look at the time as well. But just would you two recommend that film, and how does it rank, among the films you've seen here? Is it one of the better ones? How does it feel to you?
Eliana, you go first.
For me, It's a film that I would like to see again. It ranks very highly. I think it's probably, at the moment, the top film for me. In so many inexplicable ways and ways that I just feel. And I know that you have a little bit more of a complex relation to Turkey
Yeah.
and Turkish cinema. So,
Like, I think it's, to me as well, like maybe because of its subject matter, the zone of interest is also there, but it's also in terms of like the technical aspects, the aesthetics, and the subjects he tackles. I think so far, yeah, it's one of my like favorites, maybe like with the zone of interest in first three. But it's really difficult to me like to rank films, especially if I really love them. So let's just say it's definitely in the first three.
all
Yeah.
right.
I'll join you in on that as well. For me, that was really the first highlight, and maybe still the film I look forward to the most to seeing again. And let's maybe go to a debut now, and this is Joanna Arnow's The Feeling That the Time for Doing Something Has Passed. Eliana, since I think this film has maybe some interests that you share as well. What kind of film is that?
So the film is about a woman in her maybe late 20s, early 30s.
She's 33.
She's 33. Okay, so we know that she's 33. She's, I don't think this is a spoiler, she's naked all the time. She's emerged from a generation of people post 9/11, takes place in Brooklyn. Film itself is a fragmented, or some people have said mosaic, like collection of small vignettes in which we understand a woman who has grown up thinking perhaps that success and failure are very closely linked, that she doesn't know her place in life, that her job is her identity. She has a low corporate job and she doesn't quite know what to do. She's in a long-term relationship as a subordinate.
Yeah, so one should say that she practices BDSM, and this is really part of her, overall life, really, that all these humiliations that are also something that she nourishes at the same time that she feels uncomfortable with them. So she cannot be without them, but sometimes when she faces these situations, they are also quite harmful to her. And maybe just to contextualize a bit more, so as I said, this is a debut feature, and she had some short films which also, for instance, played at the Berlinale, where she, for Better Dancing, she won a Silver Bear. And another title is I Hate Myself, with a smiley at the end. Like, the smiley is part of the title. So you can just infer from these titles that, she is very concerned with, herself, like self-hatred, but also to some extent self-love, and maybe about representing things that are not seen very often on screen. And this is executive produced by Sean Baker and plays in the Quinzaine de Cinéastes here. It's really, it's a really funny film. I think the audience were having a blast, I think, when we saw it. I don't know if your audience reacted similarly.
My audience reacted similarly. There are a lot of very funny snippets in her interaction with her parents.
And I guess we didn't mention yet. We should say that Joanna Arnow plays the lead.
Ah,
here.
yes.
So, and her name is Anne. It's
Yes.
a very autofictional. Yeah.
It's very autofictional, and it's a woman who is existing in a society that seems to want to erase her, but she's very conscious of this idea of her role in
Right.
it, and she's very conscious of what other people want of her. I think one of my favorite scenes was when she asks her long-term BDSM partner, "Can we just have silence?" And he responds by saying, "We tried that before, but you felt very hurt." And then silence ensues.
Yeah, and this sort of represents this ambiguity of her feelings toward these humiliations that she sort of, summons, but then when they occur, she is uncertain about whether she wants to proceed with them or not. And so it's really fascinating. And a lot of these, a lot of the comedy here just results also from the fact that the camera often just stays way too long on a scene. And it stays so long on the scene that it then becomes funny at some point. It's just, it's very good. It's very elliptic. It's very, also, at times it plays really out like a sketch comedy, right? Because there is not really a narrative frame here, I suppose. It's rather really structured in scenes as opposed to like a thread or something that connects them. And if you couldn't hear Öykü so much here, this is because you haven't seen that yet, right?
Yes, I'm really curious about it, and I'm still trying to get it into my schedule because there's a last screening tonight. So let's see whether I'm going to see here or in its rerun in Paris in maybe like a 2 or 3 weeks. Let's hope. But I'm really really curious about this film, and I know like when you see a film and you read about it, you know that you're going to like it. I think that's one of the films like this for me at least.
Right, and it matches perfectly with a film that I hope we will talk about soon, but we cannot today, and this is Blackbird, Blackbird, Blackberry. I think they portray
Yes.
in a way, it's a companion piece, I think, in some sorts, even though they are very different women with a lot of different awarenesses, but I
Yes.
think they will, that would be a good double feature.
There is something there about the way that
Did you
these
see that too, Öykü?
So I'm gonna add to my schedule right now.
Okay.
No. It's this year I'm having problems with going to Kenzan. Like, it's so hard to schedule everything, and yeah, I have not much. I haven't seen much from the Kenzan this year, sadly.
It is difficult to schedule, but luckily in Paris they will be showing in the following 2 weeks or so the Cannes and the Semaine de la Critique.
And also the USR, like UACR, and Certain Regard will also pass in. Yeah.
Right.
To our Parisian audience.
Yes.
Which I have no troubles to believe is numerous. And let's now switch maybe to the last film that I could imagine we all like to a more or lesser extent, and this is Todd Haynes' May December. Öykü, what kind of relationship do you have with Todd Haynes and his films?
I think like it's a relation that tends these technical, like aesthetic aspects of analysis when you do the film criticism. It like touches me in a way that it's like a personal preference for a filmmaker, even though you don't like, even though there are like some I don't know, parts that are not perfect, you just love it. And I think it's precious that we have those kind of films and filmmakers, and I think that Todd Haynes is definitely one of them.
I'd have to agree. I think he has masterful control over his vision and in creating atmosphere and just evoking all that he does through his films. I think of Carol, and I was very impressed by May December, just how camp it was, how in the mood, how the visual film was overexposed. It felt like we were looking at an open tabloid magazine.
And also like a telenovela aesthetic too.
Right, because it is sort of overexposed, right? It's way too bright, but it also pertains to like film aesthetics. It looks very grainy at the same time. It has this weird mixture. This is also maybe a very timely episode because today it was announced that Netflix has bought the rights for North America for $11 million. So I hope this does not mean that there will not a theatrical release there. But since this is only for North America, I also hope at least that in Europe this may play out differently and there will be screenings in theaters. Yeah, the fifth, I think, collaboration with
Yes.
Julian Moore as well. So this is really, what do you call it? Like a
Muse director relationship.
Exactly. It's really that. And we have here Natalie Portman as well, who's hired to play the character of Julianne Moore, who has spent some time in prison for a relationship she had with
her son's friend, like, and also he was working in the pet shop that she's also working.
right. And this started when her later husband was 13 years old. So
Yeah.
Yes.
and this will not be the first film in the Cannes competition that will have such a relationship. We were still waiting for the Catherine Breillat, but so that's still ahead. But yeah, Eliana, what kind of experience did you have seeing that film?
Well, this film was very funny. We were just talking about how in the Arno, there were some scenes that were so long that they became funny. Here, Todd Haynes masterfully uses music to create humor, which was very much appreciated. Topically, it's very complex. We have, as we said earlier, so Julianne Moore's character was in a relationship 20 years, or started a relationship with a 13-year-old boy, and Natalie Portman character comes in sort of like
Method actor to
yes
observe.
Right.
to observe, and she's a complete interloper, even though she is invited to interlope to some degree. And she's both becomes a presence that's not wanted, but we feast off of her own intrigue and obsession, and we ultimately come to understand, to a degree, is Natalie Portman able to portray Julianne Moore's character of Gracie or not? And Todd Haynes plays brilliantly with that by not making it about necessarily the trauma of the age gap, nor of Gracie's own character, but rather about a more interior sort of, I don't know. There's a distance. I don't know. How did you feel when you
Like,
saw it?
what I found, first of all, what I found interesting in the movie, that like it started, and we know that Natalie Portman is going to portray this woman, but we don't know why at the first place. Like we don't understand why she's there.
Right.
Then she goes through the news about this case, but still we don't get it. Like pet shop, prison, what is happening? We don't understand, and that's why gradually, like it becomes clear really gradually, and like when it's like kicks in, it's like, oh, wow, and that's process was really really interesting for me to like have that moment. And I think like first Natalie Portman's character approaches Gracie is like a more complex, hysterical, maybe like a something to like a really mysterious object, but gradually she becomes like a hysterical, caricatural reflection of that woman, because she gets so obsessed to understand why this happened, why that her husband is behaving like that, or why her children is like that. She becomes actually the maybe the comedy humor part of the story, because her passion, her obsession, it's so sometimes goes really exaggerated. And yeah.
No, I definitely felt manipulated in the same sense that my intrigue level into what her character, Portman's character, was doing to that couple who presents themselves as a very stable couple, which I think is exactly what Haynes wants us to see that fascination and the boundary of what it is that they know about one another and how they have continued this relationship from its inappropriate emergence to 20 years later, where the characters continue to have a very cozy, rural-ish, they live in Savannah, Georgia, very traditional life.
Yeah, and isn't it an island setting?
I believe they're in Savannah, Georgia, but and I think that's on the coast.
Okay.
Maybe there's a lake.
Or is there
I
a
don't
lake,
know.
or is that on the coast, or is it north?
Okay.
We should look that up.
Great.
But
Anyway, yeah, but this sort of society there plays also a big role. It's really they are, the people in her neighborhood, they sometimes send her really like literally pieces of shit, via mail, and then she's already used to it. So because of course all the press back then that has lingered and people still know what happened, and even though now this relationship is sort of socially acceptable, but at the same time people also express some pity, right? So she is this self-made baker. She works as a baker, and we later here at some point people are basically just ordering the cake there still, because she doesn't have another existence really, and she relies on, like, her existence sort of relies on having these customers and being occupied to some extent. So it's between these two poles, and I really like how this film was also so beyond moral concerns. It's really because of course this is about in a sense child abuse, but it's also clever how the film sort of undermines that. There's this one casting scene where the Natalie Portman character, she is seeing the audition tapes on her laptop, and then her conclusion at the end after seeing all the videos is these kids are not sexy enough. And I think this sort of this sort of shows us what Todd Haynes is going for. He's not at all concerned with being on the right side here, being on the legally justified side of matters. It's rather much more complex, and it's so fun to see how sometimes when you think, okay, these characters don't really have interiority, then suddenly they sort of develop some complexity, but then when you expect complexities, sometimes they suddenly become very flat, and I think he's very good at sort of orchestrating that.
And maybe I can add, like, to telenovela setting, about the fact that the story is so complex and there are like so many layers. He could have maybe like gone a bit far, like explore more, but he stopped, like as if it was an episode of a series that will continue. So I love that, like, ambiguous ending too. Like there could be lots of stuff about, because it's an extended family and they're like children from his previous husband, and her children doesn't like seem to like her either. So it's really there are lots of things to explore. The awakening of his younger husband, like, because he gradually starts what actually has happened to him, and we're left we're precisely left at that moment. We don't know what happens afterwards. He's just had this awakening. It was like an episode of a telenovela with the use of music. By the way, maybe we can tell that it's Michel Legrand, the composer, and it's from Joseph Losey's Go Between film. The soundtrack line. I mean, it's really difficult to like reproduce it here, but it's a really key thing about the film's atmosphere and tone, actually.
Yeah. It really becomes a sort of
leitmotif.
Yeah. And also, since you mentioned the aesthetics, the DP here is not as usual. I forgot his name, like Lachlan or something. The DP. It's Christopher Blofeld, and he made some of the films of Kelly Reichardt. So like Showing Up, that played last year at Cannes here, or this Jonah Hill debut, mid-90s. So and I think you can sort of see it. They have a very similar texture, and I was actually surprised to hear that this is not shot on film, because it looked very film-like. It seemed.
This is such a Todd Haynes thing, though. Like,
I suppose.
Sorry. No.
What do you mean by that?
Because, like, let's say in Far From Heaven, it's supposed to pass in like the 60s, and like he uses that aesthetic, but it's like an anachronic thing, and I think that's like feeling is also creates an anachronic sentiment of what we perceive, actually.
Yeah. And yeah, it looks very beautiful, I think, and it really fooled me in that respect, because it looked really good, and it looked like the way I like my films, like very grainy. And yeah, do we have more to say about this film?
I don't have anything else more to say about this.
I must say, even though that's not a very analytic category, but it just the acting in this film is just it's just so good. I mean, Julianne Moore is we expect from her always the best, I suppose, but Natalie Portman, who sometimes is not so successful in her choices, I think, or not as I sometimes feel weird about certain films she picks, but here she's just incredible.
Yeah.
And even this sort of lisp that
Yes.
Julianne Moore has, the way she's then impersonating the lisp
Yes.
that Julianne Moore
Yes.
takes on for the film. I mean, that's just gold. It's great. Yeah, I think
Right.
that leads us to the end of
Yeah,
the episode,
that
right?
concludes our episode. Thank you.
Thank you. I thank you.
Yeah, and maybe we had this very last question, maybe, because we are more like 2/3 into the festival or something. Do we have something like a Palme d'Or candidate that we think could make it so far? That of course we haven't seen all the films yet, but is there a film that you don't necessarily like the most, but that you think has the greatest chances of picking up the Palme d'Or?
I would say that Zone of Interest would be very high in interest for the Palme d'Or. I think, but it's very hard to say because, like Öykü said earlier, just the president of the jury this year is very unpredictable.
Who is that?
Ruben Östlund, and but there is something that seems very, let's say, very urgent about it, because it is telling us again that what we see every day, what we experience, everything, we are just as complicit. Perhaps we are living next door to whatever horror that might be taking place, just over a wall or over the metaphoric wall. And it also calls into mind the 2009 winner of the Palme d'Or, The White Ribbon. And I think that these stories sometimes are able to push.
Yeah, it's radical enough for Östlund, I guess. I'm thinking like you, but there's also like the dialogue parts of Ceylan's film where like this interaction between women and men is also reminiscent of Östlund's moral dilemmas in his film. So maybe he can like that. He could like appeal to him. So that's a chance too, I guess.
And this is such a great point, because I think often people discount that sort of aspect of Östlund's films, and they just really like to make fun of the overtness of his films, the obviousness maybe of his films. But I think these sort of moral dilemmas and these also just great dialogue work at times, like when I think of the first act of Triangle of Sadness, I think sometimes he sort of captures such okay, now I lost my train of thought, but I think I can see how you could see that Östlund might take interest in that.
Yes,
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just going to add, but now that you call into my mind the dialogue that was essentially a seduction was very, very powerful and persuasive, and I have not seen something so exciting for a while. And so to conclude, if people are looking for you, Öykü, where can they find you?
I'm on Twitter with the username Feride Mercury, like the famous singer, and I'm writing for a Turkish magazine called Altyazı, based mainly, but I also published in Movie Notebook, Senses of Cinema, and currently I'm writing for Sorosine, which is a French outlet for feminist film criticism. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for joining us, and I hope some of our listeners will follow you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, yeah, and I think we ended here, and Eliana has already alluded to the zone of interest that we are yet to talk about, I think, in an upcoming episode. I hope it will be the next one, and yeah, so long. Oh,
Yes, and thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
bye bye.